The hum of 1,000 machines once echoed through the vast factory floors of Guangzhou, a relentless symphony of progress. This was the early 2000s, a time when the electric glow of countless circuit boards illuminated the faces of workers, each one a testament to an economic miracle unfolding at breathtaking speed. Containers stacked higher than buildings streamed out of ports, carrying Made in China labels to every corner of the globe. It was a period defined by a singular, powerful narrative, a nation rising, building, producing, and lifting hundreds of millions from poverty with an almost divine efficiency. The air itself felt charged with ambition, a tangible sense that tomorrow would always be better, faster, and more prosperous. Before we go deeper, tell us, where are you watching this from? Your perspective is part of this global story. This was the era of China's meteoric ascent, a unique model of state-directed capitalism that seemed to rewrite the rules of economic gravity. Leveraging a vast, low-cost labor force fueled by massive state-backed infrastructure investments and driven by an aggressive export-led strategy, China became the world's indispensable factory. Double-digit growth rates weren't just statistics, they were the very pulse of a nation transforming. The system appeared not merely stable but unstoppable, a perpetual motion machine that promised endless replication of its success, endlessly expanding without accumulating any unsustainable internal pressures or structural vulnerabilities. This was the collective illusion embraced by all. This wasn't just an abstract economic phenomenon, it was a deeply personal promise. The idea that centralized planning and a seemingly infinite demographic dividend could endlessly defy conventional economic gravity resonated in every household, every village, every burgeoning city. It promised that hard work would always translate into upward mobility, that diligence would be rewarded with security, and that a planned future was a guaranteed future. It was this implicit contract that shaped a generation, including individuals like Li Wei, a young man from rural origins, the first in his family to attend university, driven by the belief in this powerful, unspoken covenant. If you want to understand the forces shaping our world that no one else fully explains, subscribe now and join a community that demands deeper insight. Li Wei, now 45, embodies this promise, a mid-level manager at an electronics manufacturing firm in Guangzhou, deeply integrated into those global supply chains. His life was the aspirational dream, a stable career, a modern apartment purchased with years of savings, the pride of educating his only child, and the honor of supporting his aging parents. His professional pride was immense, his days filled with the meticulous management of production lines, ensuring components flowed smoothly from factory to market. He had followed the prescribed path, diligently, tirelessly, believing that his efforts would secure a stable, incrementally improving future for his family, just as the system had promised. Yet, beneath the gleaming surface of this seemingly unstoppable engine, the seeds of fragility were already sown, invisible to most. The very stability that seemed so robust depended on a set of fundamental presuppositions that were never truly tested. The belief that infinite demographic dividends could perpetually fuel growth, or that a system could indefinitely postpone structural imbalances, was not a given. It was an untested hypothesis. The vast, intricate machine of China's economic miracle, while impressive, had a hidden design flaw, a silent accumulating pressure point that would eventually manifest, challenging the very core of its perceived invincibility. the world Li Wei inhabited, where every hum of a machine, every shipping container, every new apartment block signaled progress, was built on a foundation of unexamined assumptions. The illusion of perpetual motion, of endless growth and limitless opportunity was powerful, seductive even, but the reality that would eventually emerge was far more complex, far more unforgiving. The stability he cherished, the future he meticulously planned, began to erode not by accident, but by design. This is not fiction. It is consequence. The architects of this miracle, however, made a series of strategic choices, seemingly astute at the time, that would inevitably lead to its undoing. You might imagine a single, dramatic pivot, but the rupture was far more insidious, a slow-motion unraveling born from decades of prioritizing state-directed, debt-fueled investment. This was not a sudden accident. It was a cumulative consequence, a silent design flaw woven into the very fabric of China's economic ascent. The focus was relentlessly on rapid industrialization and a relentless export-led model, a strategy that promised immediate, tangible gains, lifting millions from destitution and fueling unprecedented growth. But every choice, no matter how well-intentioned, carries a hidden cost, a consequence that only time reveals. This was the first, almost imperceptible tremor beneath the surface of seemingly boundless prosperity. At that juncture, these decisions felt not just rational, but utterly essential. Imagine a nation desperate to escape the clutches of poverty, seeing its neighbors thrive through manufacturing and global trade. The party's strategy, channeling immense capital into factories, infrastructure, and export subsidies, appeared to be the only viable path to rapid development. It was a pragmatic response to a desperate need, a grand bargain that traded short-term market distortions for the promise of national strength and widespread prosperity. You might even argue it was the most efficient way to mobilize resources on such a colossal scale, transforming a vast agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse in mere decades. The wisdom of the moment was clear: produce, export, grow. The long-term implications, however, remained shrouded, invisible to even the most astute observers. But this singular focus, this unyielding drive for production and export, came at a profound, unacknowledged price. Systematically, domestic consumption was suppressed. Household savings were funneled into state-controlled banks to fuel more investment, and market signals were deliberately distorted. You were told to save, not to spend, to contribute to the collective good through your labor, not through your purchasing power. This created an economy reliant on external demand, a machine with an insatiable appetite for export, but a weakened internal metabolism. The system, designed to accumulate capital rapidly, inadvertently built a dependency that would prove fatal, creating vast overcapacity in industries where real internal demand simply did not exist. It was a lopsided giant, robust on one side, fragile on the other, a precarious balance that few dared to question. Compounding this structural imbalance was a demographic headwind of unimaginable force: the legacy of the one-child policy. A decision made decades earlier, for reasons of population control, was now creating an irreversible shift in the very foundation of China's economic strength. The seemingly infinite demographic dividend, that vast pool of young, low-cost labor, was beginning to shrink, replaced by a rapidly aging population and a diminishing workforce. This wasn't merely a statistical anomaly. It was a fundamental alteration of the engine itself, turning what was once a powerful tailwind into an anchor. You are witnessing the slow, relentless unwinding of a demographic bet, a long-term consequence of a policy that reshaped millions of families and, in turn, the entire economic trajectory of a nation. What seems like a logical choice in one era can become an insurmountable burden in the next. If you want to understand how seemingly correct decisions generate profound, long-term consequences that reshape entire societies and economies, subscribe to this channel and comment below with your thoughts on how historical policies impact your own future. Your perspective adds to this crucial global conversation. The structural error, then, was the dangerous belief that these accumulating imbalances, the debt, the overcapacity, the demographic decline, could be perpetually managed, indefinitely postponed, or simply outgrown. This was the collective illusion that permeated every level of society, from the highest echelons of power down to the diligent mid-level manager like Li Wei. He, like countless others, trusted the system. He saw the new factories, the gleaming infrastructure, the continued flow of goods, and believed in the inherent wisdom of the plan. The erosion was invisible to him, a silent corrosion beneath the surface of what still appeared to be a robust, functioning machine. He continued to work tirelessly, convinced that the rules of the game remained unchanged, that effort would always yield its promised reward. Yet, even as Li Wei meticulously managed his production lines, ensuring components flowed smoothly, a subtle dissonance began to emerge. Orders, once predictable and abundant, started to fluctuate with unsettling irregularity. The relentless pressure to increase output now met a frustrating reality. The returns on new investment were visibly plummeting. Projects that once guaranteed swift expansion now struggled to break even, demanding ever larger infusions of debt to sustain even modest growth. This wasn't a crisis, not yet, but a persistent, low-frequency hum of something being slightly off-key. Li Wei, ever the pragmatist, attributed it to temporary market shifts, global headwinds, anything but a fundamental flaw in the system itself. He doubled down on his efforts, believing in diligence as the ultimate solution. The problem, however, was not cyclical. It was structural, deeply embedded in the very architecture of China's growth model. The point where the system's logic truly began to fail was when the sheer volume of debt required to generate each unit of growth surged to unsustainable levels. You are witnessing a machine that needs exponentially more fuel just to maintain its speed, burning through resources with diminishing returns. The demographic dividend, once a limitless wellspring of cheap labor, had transformed into a demographic burden, a drag on productivity and future consumption. This wasn't a matter of policy adjustments. It was an economic impossibility, a mathematical certainty that continued high-speed expansion was no longer a viable option, regardless of the party's will. And so, the implicit contract began to fray. The promise that hard work would always translate into upward mobility, that diligence would be rewarded with security, started to echo hollowly in the vast factory floors. Li Wei, who had built his entire life around this covenant, felt the first faint tremors of betrayal. The system that once delivered with almost divine efficiency was now struggling to fulfill its most basic commitment. The future he meticulously planned, one of continuous stability and incremental improvement, was no longer guaranteed. Instead, a creeping uncertainty began to settle, a quiet anxiety that the engine of progress, once unstoppable, was slowly, silently, losing its power. This was the silent rupture, the first crack in the collective illusion. The path from initial triumph to structural vulnerability was not a sudden plunge, but a meticulously laid trap, step by painstaking step. You saw the gleaming new factories, the endless production lines, the dizzying speed of industrialization that pulled millions from destitution. This was the immediate, undeniable triumph of state-led investment and an aggressive export manufacturing model. It felt like an unassailable advantage, a national strategy that defied all previous economic logic. Yet, with every new factory built, every additional production line subsidized, an unseen consequence silently accumulated: massive overcapacity. Industries were churning out far more goods than the world could ever realistically consume, creating an inherent fragility, a deep dependence on external markets that few recognized as a ticking bomb beneath the surface of apparent prosperity. This was the first domino in a long, inevitable chain of consequences. This overcapacity was then compounded by another deliberate, systemic choice: the systematic suppression of domestic consumption. You were explicitly encouraged to save, not to spend, your hard-earned money diligently channeled into state-controlled banks, effectively becoming passive fuel for more investment, rather than stimulating a robust internal market. This wasn't accidental. It was a calculated policy, designed to maximize capital accumulation for the state at all costs. The immediate effect was a perverse incentive structure for local governments. Eager to demonstrate growth and secure promotions, they borrowed heavily, not to meet actual market demand, but to fund often redundant infrastructure projects and expand industries already saturated. The accumulated effect was colossal, unsustainable debt, a hidden mountain beneath the surface of glittering new highways and empty industrial parks, all financed by your compelled savings. As if these economic distortions weren't enough, an entirely different, yet equally devastating force was gathering unstoppable momentum in the background: demographics. Decades earlier, a seemingly necessary, albeit draconian, decision was made to implement the one-child policy, a stark measure intended to control population growth. Its immediate effect was undeniable: fewer births, a rapidly slowing population expansion. But its accumulated impact is now manifesting with brutal, irreversible clarity, an unprecedented shift. You are witnessing a rapidly aging society, a dramatically shrinking working-age population, and a demographic structure that turns what was once an infinite wellspring of cheap labor into a crushing, unavoidable burden. This isn't just a statistical anomaly. It's a fundamental alteration of the nation's productive capacity, directly impacting future consumption and the very engine of its economic growth. These converging paths, overcapacity, debt, and demographic collapse, did not remain abstract economic theories. They landed with a heavy thud in the lives of ordinary people, especially those like Li Wei. The vibrant hum of his factory, once a symbol of endless demand, now often faltered, as orders shrank and production lines lay idle. His own career progression, once a steady ascent, had stalled, replaced by a quiet, gnawing anxiety. The apartment he had bought with such pride, once a tangible asset appreciating year by year, now sat stagnant, its value eroding, a daily reminder of a promise unkept. This wasn't just a financial setback, it was a psychological blow, a palpable sense of economic claustrophobia closing in, a profound betrayal of the implicit contract he had always believed in. Li Wei had meticulously followed the prescribed path, diligently, tirelessly, believing that his efforts would secure a stable, incrementally improving future for his family. He had done everything right by the system's own rules, studied hard, worked harder, saved prudently for his child's education. But the predictability he had built his entire life upon was now visibly crumbling, replaced by an unsettling, pervasive uncertainty that permeated every aspect of his existence. The old metrics of success, the unwavering belief that merit would be justly rewarded, now felt like a cruel, elaborate joke. He grappled with a painful, dawning realization. The system he trusted, the one that had promised upward mobility and security for generations, was no longer delivering on its core promise. A deep sense of injustice simmered, not against an individual, but against the very structure of his world. If you feel this profound sense of structural betrayal, of a system no longer delivering on its promises, then you are ready for a deeper understanding. Subscribe to our channel. We dissect these complex hidden mechanisms that reshape your reality, ensuring you see the world not as it appears, but as it truly operates. Join us, and never settle for surface-level explanations again. The true antagonists in this unfolding drama were not flesh-and-blood villains, but the very structural elements that once fueled China's meteoric rise. You might be tempted to blame specific leaders, but the deeper, more profound truth lies in the command economy's inherent inefficiencies. Excessive state intervention, once hailed as a necessary lever for rapid growth, had become an undeniable lead weight, dragging down progress. Capital, your savings and state funds alike, was systematically misallocated on a colossal scale, poured into unproductive projects and ghost cities, rather than truly innovative, market-driven ventures. This wasn't malice, it was a system prioritizing rigid control over flexible market signals, leading to a profound, inescapable misdirection of precious resources. The very mechanism designed for efficiency had become its own worst enemy, draining vitality from the entire economy. Compounding these inefficiencies was a rigid bureaucratic apparatus, a sprawling network of regulations and approvals that stifled genuine innovation and crushed market responsiveness. You witnessed brilliant ideas struggle to gain traction against entrenched interests and cumbersome processes. Simultaneously, the financial system, rather than acting as an impartial allocator of capital, became another tool of state control. It systematically prioritized massive state-owned enterprises and local government financing vehicles, channeling credit to those least likely to generate sustainable returns, and often to projects already redundant. This created massive, unaddressed debt bubbles, a silent, expanding pressure beneath the surface, threatening to burst and engulf the entire economic landscape. These were not mere policy choices. They were the very architecture of a brewing storm. Finally, the demographic constraints, the long and inescapable shadow of decades of population control policies, emerged as an insurmountable, silent antagonist. The decision made generations ago, initially intended to manage resources and prevent scarcity, had now spawned a rapidly aging workforce and a dramatically shrinking consumer base. You are living through the profound, irreversible consequences of a generational shift, where the young, energetic workers needed to fuel tomorrow's economy simply do not exist in sufficient numbers to sustain growth. These were the impersonal, systemic forces, not individual villains, but profound, unyielding structural realities. Despite their initial perceived utility in a vastly different era, they had transformed into the primary, undeniable obstacles to sustainable growth and long-term stability, relentlessly unwinding the very foundations of the nation's economic power. The stage was set, the pressures accumulating, leading to the critical decision point, the true point of no return that solidified China's current trajectory. This wasn't a sudden cataclysmic event, but a strategic choice made in the early 2010s. Faced with undeniable signs of slowing growth, a burgeoning debt mountain, and clear structural imbalances, the leadership stood at a crossroads. They had a choice: implement fundamental, painful structural reforms that would rebalance the economy, or opt for a strategy of stability maintenance. You might imagine a decisive pivot towards sustainability. Instead, the decision was made to double down, to prioritize the illusion of short-term stability and social control over the necessity of long-term economic health. This was the moment the viable options irrevocably narrowed, sealing the nation's path. Instead of decisively shifting towards a consumption-driven model, reining in the colossal local government debt, and allowing market forces greater sway in allocating resources, the choice was to prop up ailing sectors with further credit expansion. This was perceived as rational, a necessary measure in the short term to avoid social unrest and maintain politically crucial growth targets. The profound error, however, was the squandered opportunity. The chance to rebalance the economy when the demographic dividend was still active and global conditions were more favorable was lost forever. From this point onward, China's options became severely limited, a funnel closing inexorably. Every subsequent effort to stimulate growth only deepened the existing debt burden and exacerbated structural inefficiencies, turning what could have been a managed transition into an inevitable period of stagnation under immense systemic pressure. There was no turning back. The evidence is now undeniably manifest, not in theoretical models, but in the harsh reality of shuttered factories and abandoned production lines across China's once booming industrial heartland. Once thriving, export-oriented manufacturing firms, the very engine of China's economic miracle, are collapsing or migrating en masse to other nations, unable to compete with soaring domestic labor costs and a global economy recalibrating its intricate supply chains. You are witnessing the systematic unraveling of an entire industrial ecosystem as the relentless hum of machines falls tragically silent, leaving behind vast ghost towns of industry and widespread job losses. This isn't merely a cyclical business downturn, it's a fundamental reordering, a stark validation that a system built solely on cheap labor and seemingly endless external demand could never sustain itself indefinitely, proving that this profound economic shift was not accidental, but logically predetermined by its own foundational design flaws. The human cost of this structural shift is particularly acute for China's youth, a generation once promised boundless opportunity. Data now consistently reveals a sharp decline in youth employment, forcing countless talented young graduates, individuals like Li Wei's own child, to confront a stark and disheartening choice. They are compelled to accept underemployment, working jobs far beneath their qualifications and aspirations, or, even more strikingly, to embrace the philosophy of lying flat, giving up on ambitious urban careers entirely, and retreating to rural origins or low-pressure roles. You are seeing the erosion of the aspirational ladder itself, where the path to upward mobility, once so clear, has become fragmented and uncertain, a direct consequence of an economy unable to generate sufficient, meaningful opportunities for its most dynamic cohort. Beyond unemployment, the very engine of national prosperity is sputtering. Productivity growth has plummeted, Innovation struggles desperately to gain traction against entrenched state-backed monopolies, and foreign direct investment, once a torrent, is now reversing its decades-long trend, flowing out of China rather than in. The most poignant human proof lies in the irreversible changes to daily life that you can observe. Families are increasingly postponing marriage and children, grappling with a growing sense of economic precarity among the middle class. The vibrant, aspirational optimism that once defined the nation, the belief that tomorrow would always be better, has visibly dimmed, replaced by a quiet, pervasive anxiety. This is not just a statistical downturn, it is a profound societal shift, a collective loss of faith in a future that once seemed guaranteed. If this current trajectory persists, the long-term systemic consequences for China will be nothing short of profound and transformative, shaping the destiny of generations yet unborn. Future generations will inherit an economy burdened by unprecedented levels of debt, a drastically shrinking and rapidly aging population, and a greatly diminished capacity for genuine innovation and sustained organic growth. You are watching a nation's demographic clock unwind, turning a historical advantage into an unavoidable burden, ensuring that the economic challenges faced today are not temporary blips, but foundational shifts that will define the coming decades. The implications extend far beyond its borders, altering global dynamics irrevocably. If you want to understand how these intricate, often hidden mechanisms will continue to reshape your world, driving global shifts in trade, power, and daily life, then subscribe to this channel now. We dissect the complex realities, connect the unseen dots, and prepare you for the next inevitable transformations. Don't just watch the news. Understand the forces creating it. Globally, China's once unassailable role as the factory of the world will continue its relentless erosion, a process already fundamentally altering global supply chains and forcing nations worldwide to reevaluate their deep, often vulnerable international trade dependencies. This isn't merely about where goods are made, it's about a complete redrawing of the economic map, impacting everything from manufacturing jobs in your own country to the prices you pay for everyday products. Its economic stagnation will inevitably translate into a significant, measurable loss of geopolitical leverage and influence on the world stage, profoundly challenging its ambitions for global leadership. You are witnessing the slow, inexorable decline of a global economic hegemon, a shift with ramifications far beyond mere GDP figures. Domestically, the very social contract, built upon decades of continuous economic improvement and the promise of upward mobility, will be irrevocably strained, potentially leading to increased social friction and widespread disillusionment. This unique model of state-directed development, once hailed as a triumph, is now poised for a complete transformation, shifting from one defined by relentless external expansion to one characterized by managed decline and an increasingly internal focus. You are observing the difficult, painful process of a nation grappling with its own structural limitations, forced to recalibrate expectations and redefine its future, not through growth, but through stability at all costs, fundamentally reshaping its relationship with its own citizens and the world. This entire story offers a critical, universal lesson. No economic model, however seemingly robust or spectacularly successful in its initial phase, can indefinitely defy fundamental economic principles or the immutable realities of demographics. China's experience reveals a profound, universal pattern where unchecked structural imbalances, particularly within a centralized system that consistently prioritizes rigid control over flexible adaptation, inevitably transform initial strengths into terminal vulnerabilities. It demonstrates, with stark clarity, that the seductive illusion of perpetual growth, especially when artificially fueled by unsustainable debt and temporary demographic anomalies, always carries a heavy, delayed, and inescapable cost that eventually must be paid. For the global audience, this narrative underscores a crucial truth. A slower, structurally constrained China is not merely a less dynamic economic partner, but a fundamentally different geopolitical actor, one whose internal pressures and overriding incentives for stability will reshape everything from global trade patterns to international relations. It makes it imperative for you to understand the intricate, often unseen mechanisms now driving its inevitable deceleration, because these forces will directly impact your own future. The era of effortless, exponential growth is over. The world must now contend with the complex, multifaceted consequences of a giant recalibrating its very foundations.